quality to which all human beings are sort of naturally subject, and that is adhering to their own views, holding on to them tenaciously, insisting upon them. My view is right, others are wrong, and then relinquishing them with difficulty. So even when you're shown proof, what you're saying is wrong, this is correct, you still sort of distort the proof, you refuse to look at it, you insist on your own view. So this is maybe the sickness of clinging to one's own views just because it happens to be the view that you like. And so the virtue, according to the Buddha, is that one should have the mind, the determination. We shall not adhere to our own views or hold on to them tenaciously, but we should relinquish them easily. This is a quality that when I first became involved with Buddhism, I had to learn a hard way, because maybe this is the way university students are trained in the US, is that you always are taught that you have to defend your own view, stand up and defend yourself. And so if you form an opinion, then you have to be ready to argue for it. You don't surrender to the other person. Maybe that's why we have debating teams in high school and colleges, so that you learn to defend your own view. And so when I started to read about Buddhism many years ago, when I was associated with my first Buddhist teacher, then he had been a monk for like 20 years or so, and I was a few months reading about Buddhism. But I would read something in a book, and then I thought, this is what is said in the book. My teacher says something else, so I take what's in the book and I argue with him, and I would always be very insistent on my opinion. And then when he would refuse to accept my view, then I would come to a sort of crash descent, a crash landing. It would really upset me and make me furious with anger. And so he taught me, gave me a very useful lesson, that whenever you get into a disagreement with somebody about views, always think, I might be right, I might be wrong, that's not important. But what's important is to find out what is true. And so he taught me in those days, because I used to have that tendency so strongly, he told me that every day in the morning after you get up, you should say to yourself, if I get into an argument with anybody, I might be right, I might be wrong, that is not important. What's important is to find out the truth. And so I did that for a while, and then I found that tendency to cling to my own views started to fade away. It still hasn't gone yet, after all these years. Okay, so that takes us through the 44 modes of effacement. Does anybody have any questions on any of them? Or any comments?
You mentioned that the right view in the Noble Eightfold Path refers to the four jhanas. Is
right concentration.
Oh, right concentration. I'm sorry. And is the assessed concentration before the first jhana ever mentioned in any sutra as part of the right concentration?
It's not. Yeah, access concentration first is is not, the expression is not used in the suttas at all. It's the expression access concentration first appears in texts like Visuddhimagga and the commentaries. And so we don't actually find this expression access concentration in the suttas, but there are some occasions where the Buddha speaks about samadhi or concentration in connection with certain meditation subjects, which seem to me unlikely to lead to jhana. For example, in relation to recollection of the Buddha, recollection of the Dhamma, recollection of the Sangha, those are the recollection of the three jewels, the recollection of virtue or sila, generosity, the recollection of death. And so those are meditation subjects which use a fair amount of thought, thinking activity. And so because they use thinking activity, they don't lead to, it seems that they don't lead, that they can't lead to jhana. And yet the Buddha says that they are the basis for samadhi. So my conjecture would be that the samadhi that they lead to would be what is called access concentration in the commentaries, in the Visuddhimagga and commentaries. Now the definition of right concentration given that we find in the suttas, in various suttas which define the factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, is always given as the four jhanas. And so some monks or interpreters, they come to the conclusion that the attainment of jhana is necessary to qualify as right concentration. But I'm not in agreement with this. It seems to me that, at least for the attainment of the stage of stream entry, even the stage of once returning, those stages can be achieved without the prior attainment of full jhana. They could be achieved on the basis of a concentration which would be equivalent to access concentration. Okay, Nakawa, is that the way you pronounce it? Nagawa. Nagawan.
I just was looking at with the views. That's such a, in life, it's such a tricky thing because, you know, sometimes you know in your heart that you're right. Let's say the climate. I mean, people.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I think it's the anger and the hostility behind, you know, the view. But if you can.
Oh yeah. Definitely, I have to make that point. Yeah. Sometimes
you're just right.
If you're right, definitely you should stay with your right view. It doesn't mean that you have to give up your view, submit to the other when you have a disagreement.
Right, but then I guess what we're saying is that you maintain harmony anyway, regardless. You're not going to be the last one to get the right word in, and you're not going to.
Yeah. I think it's that attitude of clinging to one's view. So that one definitely should maintain one's view if one thinks that it's reasonable and it has evidence behind it. But it's that attitude that this is my view, so I have to cling to it and insist on it because it's mine.
There's a certain amount of clinging to it because you know ultimately it's right.
Yeah, but you should uphold let's say one should uphold one's view if one knows it's right, especially in situations where the triumph of a correct view is very important to this important, say, ethical and social consequences, like those who deny climate change, global warming. You know, if their view were to prevail and everybody were to accept the idea that, in the words of this Senator James Inhofe, that global warming might be the greatest hoax ever perpetuated, how did he put it, the greatest hoax ever imposed upon the American people. So if that view were to prevail, then we wouldn't try to do anything about global escalate with destructive consequences. Okay, so one has to maintain one's position, but I think it's the subjective attitude that's intended here.
Because I think too, I know in my own experience, when I, like you say, cling too much to views, the anger just, it starts to brew. You could feel the heat arising.
Yeah.
So once you feel that heat, you have to kind of, back down and, say, whoa, I think this is headed right here.
Yeah, but it's a matter of training the mind. And also that sentence for recollection that my first teacher had given me, I might be right, I might be wrong, that's not important. What's important is to find out the truth. But in situations where you're on fairly solid ground in believing that you have the truth, then you should stand firm in adherence to the truth. Okay, in the back.
These 44 practices for effacement are a form of self-cultivation.
Yeah.
But then there's this term non-self. I think linguistically it's hard for me to reconcile. Why am I cultivating the self if I'm not that?
Okay. Okay, what the Buddha teaches is that the factors of experience, the factors of our being that we cling to as being myself, these are the factors that are non-self in the sense that they're not a permanent, lasting, substantial entity, or that they don't constitute a basis for persisting personal identity. But there's still what I would call the empirical person existing as a reality. The empirical person is not a single substantial entity, but it's a complex, conditionally arisen phenomena made up of a number of components. Okay, now this empirical person continues through time, and depending upon our choices, our actions, the direction we take, whether we cultivate ourselves properly or we become heedless, that will determine our destiny, whether we are moving towards happiness and freedom or bondage and suffering. And so even though there's no sort of solid individual permanent self, but the empirical person continues. And so what we have to do is to create, but to cultivate in the present those factors in our being that will be the causes and conditions for positive development in the future. And then those will bring us happiness, freedom, wisdom in the future. Any further questions? Okay, then I'll take the internet questions. Okay, question 1. What is wrong deliverance? That's factor number 20. Or wrong liberation? Actually, interestingly, there's no concrete explanation of this given in the suttas. So all I could do is offer speculation. It could be taking one of the meditative attainments like the jhanas or formless meditations to be true liberation. Or else it could be the view that was held by some in the Buddha's time that one should just feel free to indulge oneself in the 5 types of sensual pleasure. Form, sounds, delightful form, sounds, odors, tastes, touches. That is true liberation. Question number 2, does factor number 44 mean that Buddhists should not hold on to any ideology or maybe any ideas? I think that's pretty much the same point I already covered in the question from Nakawan. So one should definitely hold on to ideas one takes to be right and that seem to be reasonable. Okay, are these 44 effacement practices another way to state the 37 factors of enlightenment? The Eightfold Path is among them, but otherwise a few of the others correspond to the 37 factors of enlightenment, but they're not entirely the same. Then the question is there mention of access concentration anywhere in the suttas? As I said, the word or the expression access concentration isn't found in the suttas. There's upachara samadhi in Pali, but there are some types of samadhi mentioned in the suttas that seem to be the basis for access concentration. Okay, does self-respect, fear of wrongdoing, and karmic consequences mean that while there is non-self, there is not no self? Not so clear. But anyway, as I said in answer to the earlier question, the teaching of non-self means that there's no sort of inner nucleus of personal identity, but there is the empirical person, or we could even call this the empirical self. So the Buddha says you should purify oneself, one should cultivate oneself, one should train oneself. And this is not referring to some kind of permanent or substantial lasting self, but it's a way of indicating you should cultivate one's own person so that one will establish the right conditions for receiving the desirable results. Okay, I want to move on and just quickly try to end the sutta because the rest can be covered. It's a bit repetitive. Runs through the 44 factors, but just with this, each one with a slightly different slant. Okay, in paragraph number 13, the Buddha is saying, he says, I say that even the inclination of mind towards wholesome states is of great benefit. So what should be said of bodily and verbal acts conforming to that state of mind? Here what's called the state of the inclination of mind literally means the arousing of the mind. It's chitta. Might be rendered making a resolution or making a determination towards wholesome states. This would be like the Chinese fa shen. So this shows, and then the Buddha illustrates this by saying the mind should be inclined, or one should make the resolution thus: others will be cruel. We shall not be cruel here. So even if one can't undertake the actual practice, but set up this resolution or determination, just as on the New Year, we begin by making New Year's resolutions. I'm going to give up smoking, give up drinking, give up hanging out and maybe nightclubs. So I'm going to start a new life. But when people make that determination, if they don't repeat it every day, then a week, 10 days go by, then it's smoking again, drinking again, going to the nightclub again. But when you make the resolution every day. What I often suggest to people is to find, out of this list of 44 just find 3 or 5 qualities. Don't think of 44, it's too much. Or any 3 to 5 qualities, good qualities that you want to cultivate. And then make the determination that every day I'm going to develop these qualities. I'm going to eliminate these bad qualities, develop these good qualities. And when you make that determination every day, you find that the mind, little by little, even if it's resistant, it will move towards those wholesome qualities. Okay, so that's repeated for all 44 factors. Then, the next one is interesting. This is called, it's given the heading avoidance. So the Buddha begins with a simile. Suppose there were an uneven path or a rough path, and then there was another even path by which to avoid it. Or when, say, a road is being repaired, a public highway is being repaired, then the state authorities will open up a detour so that you can reach your destination avoiding the road that's under repair. Or suppose there were an uneven or dangerous ford, a place for crossing the river, and another even ford, a safe place by which to avoid it. So then, if you had any sense, you would take that safe, secure ford. And so, for all of these unwholesome ways of behavior, the Buddha has laid down the wholesome way by which to avoid it. So if one is given to harming others, then one has the principle of harmlessness or non-violence by which to avoid it. If one is given habitually to killing living beings, then one takes the precept to abstain from killing living beings. And so for each of these other factors, the mental states, you have just the resistance to that mental state by which to avoid it. And so that applies to all 44 ways. Okay, then we come on page 130. Here the text points out the direction in which these unwholesome states and wholesome states lead. So they lead in opposite directions. The unwholesome states lead downwards. That is, when one engages in those unwholesome states, they can become habitual. Once they become habitual, they become the determinants of your character. That once they become the determinants of your character, then they become the determinants of your destiny. And as determinants of your destiny, they'll lead downwards to states of deprivation, and in the process of rebirth, they'll lead to lower states of rebirth. So people who have unwholesome character traits, those character traits, if it's like the animal character traits, that will be the tendency to be reborn as an animal. If it's a very greedy, avaricious, niggardly character trait, that is the basis for the rebirth as a preta, or hungry ghost. And if it's a very hateful, vicious, mean, violent, destructive character, it could lead to rebirth in the hell realms. And so those unwholesome states lead downwards, and the wholesome states will lead upwards. So when we do good deeds, those deeds become the seeds of new habits, of good habits. The good habits form our character, and our character forms our destiny. So when we engage in these good deeds, they become the basis for a happy rebirth in the human realm, in the heavenly or celestial realms, and for the attainment of nibbana, liberation. Okay, then this last section seems to be spoken in order to maybe to temper the premature enthusiasm of those who want to go about teaching and transforming others. So the Buddha says that one who is himself sinking in the mud, should pull out another who is sinking in the mud. That is impossible. But that one who is not himself sinking in the mud should pull out another sinking in the mud. That is possible. And so in the same way, if one who is himself untamed, undisciplined, then the text uses the word aparinibhuto, which literally means not extinguished, with the sense whose defilements are not extinguished, should tame another, discipline another, and help another extinguish his or her defilements. That is impossible. And so this doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to help others with the Dhamma until you're perfect yourself. But if you're not really trying to train or discipline yourself, and instead you're just letting yourself drift along with the unwholesome states, then don't think you can become a savior or enlightener of others. But then the text says that one who is himself tamed, disciplined, who has distinguished his defilements, should be able to tame, discipline, and help extinguish the defilements of another. That is possible. And then this is applied to all 44 types of behavior. Okay, so then the Buddha finishes the sutta by saying, the way of effacement has been taught by me. The way of inclining the mind or making a determination has been taught by me. The way of avoidance, of avoiding the unwholesome states and taking the wholesome path has been taught to me, by me. The way leading upwards has been taught by me. And the way of extinguishing defilements has been taught by me. And then he says, what should be done for his disciples out of compassion by a teacher who seeks their welfare and has compassion for them, that I have done for you. Here are the roots of trees. These are empty huts. Meditate, do not delay, or else you will regret it later. This is our instruction to you. And that is the end of the sutta. Okay, so now I'll ask whether there's any questions on anything that's arisen in the course of the sutta. Please feel welcome to us. Okay, no questions then. Oh, okay, there is. That's Matthew.
Thank you. One of the words of the ideas that was discussed here was generosity and miserliness.
Yeah.
Withholding. How, I don't don't see that
Yeah,
in
wait, put the microphone.
the notion of generosity and,
Yeah.
and withholding from others, miserliness. Is that one of the defilements or the practices of effacement? I don't see it.
I think this would be included under what's translated here as under number 29, avarice. Avarice, the Pali word here is maccharya, which means holding on to one's own possessions, not sharing them with others. And so the opposite of this is not, it's given in the negative, this is often done in the Buddhist text, non-avarice, which means lack of miserliness or stinginess, which will imply giving generously. I mean, often the text use the word giving or generosity explicitly. Here, because the text is often, this text is formulated very often through the negative way, then it doesn't explicitly use the word generosity, but it's implied by non-avarice. Okay, I'll take this internet question. What is the difference between Sallekha or effacement, purification of mind, and breaking the 10 fetters? It seems that the way, first, this word Sallekha is not used very often in the Buddhist texts. It's a rather rare, it's rather unusual for the Buddha to use that word. And so it seems that this sutta is almost unique in giving a lot of attention to that word Sallekha. So it seems that this was a word, as I said at the beginning, that was sort of floating around amongst the different ascetic communities in the Buddha's time. And so the Buddha is taking this word and sort of adopting it into his own teaching, not with a very technical sense, but just as a cover term for this whole process of training the mind to eliminate unwholesome ways of behavior, thinking, reaction, and so on. And so it seems to have a very broad meaning within the Buddhist teaching and not a fixed technical meaning. Whereas purification of mind has or can have a more limited meaning, and that is the overcoming of the 5 hindrances as the preliminary stage towards attaining the jhanas, the meditative absorptions. And then breaking the 10 fetters, that refers technically to the stages of enlightenment or liberation that come when the wisdom eliminates the fetters or cuts off the fetters at their subtlest level so that they can never arise again. Okay, so this will end the discussion for today. And so we'll end with the sharing of the merits. Next week, I won't be here, so we won't have a class next week, but we'll come back and we'll have the next class. Today is the 2nd, the 9th, I won't be here. The next class will be the 16th, correct? And did I put up the schedule for, not yet? Okay, so I'll select the suttas and give you the class schedule. Heidi will put them up on the BOWS website, so please check the BOWS website. And we'll print out some copies next time. I'm sorry I've been traveling around and a little busy with other things recently. Okay, so then we'll come back after the lunch and we'll have discussion from about 12, maybe a little after 12, till 12:30, if anybody has any further questions. Okay, so we end with the sharing of the merits. So I'll do the second set of 3 verses in the abridged form. punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanam akasata chumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanam akasata chumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mam param etavata cha amhehi sampadam punya sampadam sabbe devanumodantu sabbe buddhanumodantu sabbe sadanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya bhavagupadhaya avichihitato etantare satakaya upapanna rupi arupi cha asanya sanino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibhuting. Okay, thank you all again for braving the snow coming out here. I hope in 2 weeks